Well, at the end of the last video, we we learned the concept of transport maximum, and we used the analogy of Lucy and Ethel at the candy factory as our analogy. But let's do one more overview for the nephron itself. All right. So pay attention. We're going to start the process of cleaning the blood here at the glomerulus with filtration. Filtration happens at the glomerulus and captured at the glomerular capsule. So you could say filtration happens at the renal corpuscle, filtration happens at the glomerulus, filtration happens at Bowman's capsule. I'm cool with any of those. Right? Now, immediately the fluid, and it's not technically called filtrate anymore, but on my exam, I may refer to it as filtrate. Technically, it's tubular fluid, but now it's here in the proximal convoluted tubule. And the proximal convoluted tubule is actually much longer than is shown here. The proximal convoluted tubule is by far the most active part of the nephron. If someone said, oh, hey, you've got to get rid of part of your nephron, do not get rid of the proximal convoluted tubule, okay? Because in many ways, it's the most important. What is it doing? It is actively reabsorbing all of the glucose that was in that filtrate. How much glucose is in the filtrate? Exactly what was in your plasma is exactly the same because filtration, right? Amino acids is going to actively reabsorb those. Active reabsorption means active transport, using energy to transport things in. Vitamins are all going to be there. Lactate. Lactate is a byproduct of when your muscles are working without enough oxygen. And lactate would end up there in the filtrate, but if it goes to the liver, your liver can put it back together again and make a glucose molecule. Yes, urea is also getting reabsorbed there. That's complicated. We're going to just bypass that. All right. All of these things are also getting most of them actively reabsorbed. Water is passively reabsorbed. They're at the proximal convoluted tubule. Now, what is being actively secreted? Now we're talking about tubular secretion. Well, we're talking about particularly hydrogen ions and ammonium, but also urea and creatinine. So those things are being actively transported. You'll notice that the proximal convoluted tubule is the part of the system that will help your body eliminate some drugs. Okay? So all that's happening at the proximal convoluted tubule. Then what is going on here at the distal convoluted tubule? The distal convoluted tubule is responsible for actively reabsorbing sodium and actively secreting potassium. It's also responsible for actively secreting hydrogen ions or reabsorbing bicarbonate. So the job of the distal convoluted tubule is narrower. It really is specializing in sodium and potassium balance and in pH balance. It also reabsorbs a little bit of water, okay? What is the nephron loop for? The nephron loop's main job is water reabsorption. It works in a very trick way that we will discuss. And what's the job of the collecting duct? The job of the collecting duct, and you should know this is the only part of this entire kidney system that actually can fix the tonicity of your blood. Tonicity, whether your blood is hypertonic, hypotonic, or isotonic. If it is not right, if it's not isotonic, it is that collecting duct that will fix that for you. So just a little bit more about the proximal convoluted tubule. So much happens there. Waste removal actively can act there. Catecholamines like epinephrine, they are eliminated from your body through the kidneys. And there is acid-base balance at the proximal convoluted tubule. Remember, the proximal convoluted tubule does kind of like almost everything. Distal convoluted tubule specializing in pH, sodium and potassium, and a little bit of water absorption. All right, let's move on to the distal convoluted tubule. The distal convoluted tubule, sodium and potassium, pH, and it ends up reabsorbing some water. Right? Let's talk about that in some more detail. Reabsorption and secretion. The most powerful way for your body to regulate pH is the kidneys. Now, there are three ways that your body keeps your blood pH right there between 7.35 and 7.45, right? There are three ways. You've got buffers in your bloodstream, primarily bicarb, right? Your respiratory system can change the pH by getting rid of more CO2 or less CO2. That's a little bit helpful. But write this down, by far the most powerful way of regulating your body's pH is the kidneys. And for those of us that are omnivores, that eat at least a moderate amount of meat, for example, we will make more hydrogen ions than our body needs. So we have the need to be able to actually throw away hydrogen ions, and the only place to do that is in the kidneys. Okay, so one of the ways that the distal convoluted tubule acts is by grabbing onto hydrogen ions and throwing them into the filtrate, essentially throwing away acid. Also, reaching into the filtrate and grabbing bicarbonate and putting it back into the bloodstream. Hydrogen ions and bicarbonate are traded for each other to maintain, to get rid of acid from the blood. That happens at the proximal convoluted tubule, and then the distal convoluted tubule finishes up the work that needs to get done. But the distal convoluted tubule is also very important for reabsorbing sodium and secreting potassium. But this is under the control of a hormone known as aldosterone. Now, if aldosterone rings a bell, it should. Aldosterone is one of the hormones that we talked about in the endocrine system segment of the class. Aldosterone is one of the steroid hormones. It is a steroid hormone that is made by the adrenal cortex, and it will be released under a few situations. When your blood pressure is too low, it will get released. We'll talk about that in more detail. Also, when sodium levels in your blood are too low or potassium levels are too high, aldosterone will be released. Now, with a modern diet, our sodium levels are hardly ever too low in a modern diet. However, in the natural world, if we were like free-ranging humans somewhere, then there actually would not be usually very much sodium in our diet. So this hormone, aldosterone, would be very important. Where are the target cells for the hormone aldosterone? The target cells for the hormone aldosterone are principal cells in the distal convoluted tubule and also in the cortical region of the collecting duct. Let me go back to that picture. No, that's not a good picture. All right. So right about here, let me grab a pen. Right about here, this would be where the arcuate artery and vein are, okay? Right about here. And so that means that all of this area up here is the cortex, and all of this area down here is the medulla. This structure right here, the collecting duct, is kind of divided up into two parts. It has a medullary region, and the medullary part of the collecting duct goes through the medulla by going through the renal pyramid, and then it's got this cortical region of the collecting duct. If you are like me, you will find it useful just to remember that the cortical part of the collecting duct kind of follows all of the rules and does the same job as the distal convoluted tubule. The medullary part of the collecting duct we will be talking about with water conservation. Alrighty, so in the distal convoluted tubule and the cortical collecting duct, there are two kinds of cells. There are principal cells and intercalated cells. The intercalated cells are very important for pH. Very important for pH. Do they also reabsorb potassium? Yes, but let's please remember them with pH. The principal cells are particularly important for the balance of sodium and potassium. And they are target cells for this hormone, aldosterone. You definitely need to know this for your final exam, that aldosterone's job is to make your body retain sodium. And when your body retains sodium, it will simultaneously throw away potassium. Just like hydrogen ions and bicarbonate are the opposites of each other. So when the body's reabsorbing one, it's secreting the other. Sodium and potassium are that way too. When the body doesn't have enough sodium, this hormone aldosterone is released, and the principal cells will reabsorb sodium and will throw away potassium. There is an opposite hormone that I will remind you of because we did learn about it, called atrial natriuretic peptide. We learned about that in the cardiovascular system. It is actually the opposite, and it does the opposite. It makes the principal cells secrete sodium and reabsorb potassium. So aldosterone will do that when your body's sodium levels are too low. But aldosterone will also be released when your blood pressure is too low. Why is that? Well, when your body reabsorbs sodium, water will follow the sodium back into the body by osmosis. And so when your body reabsorbs sodium, it'll cause water to stay behind. You'll make less urine, and you will save more body water. When we eat a whole bunch of salt and we are holding water, because of osmosis. Okay. So the kidney's excretion of hydrogen ions or bicarbonate. First of all, it's just useful for the rest of your education to remember that hydrogen ions and bicarbonate, they're kind of like the two halves of carbonic acid, but hydrogen ions, if we've got too many of those, things will be very acidic. If we add more bicarbonate, we end up making things more alkaline, and I'm going to just skip over the chemical reason for that, okay? So if your body wants to be less acidic, it'll bring in bicarbonate, this guy, and it'll throw away hydrogen ions. If your body wants to be more acidic, it would hold on to hydrogen ions and get rid of bicarbonate. The body's pH is right between 7.35 and 7.45, usually right at 7.4. If you are a typical meat eater, the pH of your urine might be a pH of about 5. Why? Because you've got way too many hydrogen ions in your blood, and your kidneys get rid of them by throwing them into your urine, making your urine more acid. I keep saying meat eaters. Why? Because sometimes vegetarians will have an alkaline urine. The alkaline urine is mostly if you eat a lot of dark leafy greens. So if you eat lots of kale and spinach and Swiss chard, and hey, let's throw in all of the cruciferous vegetables like broccoli. If you eat a lot of that, you'll end up having more of an alkaline pH because there are a lot of alkaline substances inside of those foods. All right, we will pick up here at the beginning of the next lecture.